All right, we are here with Scott Stenwick, priest with the Ordo Templi Orientis, or OTO. Do I have that right?
Yes.
All right,
Ordo Templi
brilliant.
Orientis is
Now,
correct.
yep. And so I've actually, this is in pre-COVID days. I don't know if they're still doing the Gnostic Mass in
We are.
person. Okay. I actually attended a Gnostic Mass,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, my impression was it's probably rife with symbolism I don't understand, right?
Well, there is a
And
lot of symbolism in it. That is true.
yeah, for sure. And I'm told that don't, when somebody asks you what your opinion was, don't say interesting, because 100% of people say that. They say, what do you think? I thought it was interesting. It's
Well,
not
you
going
know
to be
that
my reaction,
that
right?
has changed a little bit over the years. So we did have somebody who was not a Minnesotan who said it was interesting, who actually liked it. That's the Minnesotan thing of, oh, that's interesting. That's really what we're looking for to avoid,
Yeah,
because
well,
generally
interesting can
speaking,
be good. I mean, it could be like, oh,
yeah.
that's interesting. Like it was egregiously, like what did I just do? But I mean,
Mhm.
it could be positive. I mean, I'm sure it is, right?
Well, yeah, it can be. And actually, like I say, we did have somebody who said interesting, who did actually like it and stick around. And actually, most people don't say that these days. At least
Okay,
certainly since, so Leaping Laughter here in the Twin Cities, we reopened in person July 17th of last year. So we've been reopened almost a year,
okay,
doing in-person events. So yeah, so far we haven't had a lot of that whole interesting thing, so that's good.
yeah, good deal. Yeah, and now looking into it a bit, Leaping Laughter, that's a part of Aleister Crowley's the book. Was it Book of the Law? That's a reference to.
So yes, so most OTO lodges, when they figure out what the name is going to be for their group, they pick a name that is mentioned somewhere in the Book of the Law. So the line in the Book of the Law is "Forced fire, leaping laughter, and delicious languor are of us." That's the line it comes from.
Yeah, yeah, very good. And let's see, what else was I going to touch on briefly? So, well, Gnostic Mass. Um, I I just it's hard to compare what it's like, right? I'm trying to give like
Well, it's okay.
yeah,
So it's Gnostic, okay, and so the
yeah,
whole point of Gnosticism is we're trying to work with direct experience of the divine. That's what gnosis is, okay. And so what we're looking at is we're looking at something that you know we're doing what I think religion is supposed to do and kind of doesn't a lot of the time, which is that a religion should be a system that a person can work with that will produce spiritual / religious experiences. Okay. It should not be a thing where, you go to a church and, it's, a minister telling you, oh, God is this and God is this and God is that. And, you aren't really doing any sort of spiritual practice, sitting and listening to that. I mean, you have communion at most Christian churches. That's a Eucharistic ritual. So, I mean, so that's something. But it's not really something that is going to really provide the kind of instruction that a person would need to have that experience themselves. And having the experience yourself is important. And that is what we are trying to do for people who come and see the Gnostic Mass. Now, it resonates with some people, it doesn't resonate with other people. It's not clear, just from meeting somebody on the street, I wouldn't necessarily know if the system that we have and the way we work it necessarily works for them. There are people in the OTO who are much more interested in the degree initiations than the Mass, for example. I mean, there's a lot that you could do in OTO. But I do think that the Gnostic focus is really the key, and that's really important. Because, I mean, certainly that's also where the overlap comes in, with the OTO and teaching magic. I mean, magic, as Crowley conceptualized, is a whole collection of techniques. all kinds of different things that you can do that are, based on, some Western techniques, some Eastern techniques. Actually, a surprisingly complete collection of Eastern techniques from when Crowley was publishing them. I mean, today it's like,
Mm-hmm.
you've got yoga studios all over the place, and, you can go like different places and learn meditation and stuff like that. But, Crowley's system, for what it was and for the time it came out, it was actually quite complete. His yoga system is really simplified, but it does have one of every single type of yoga posture. He only has like one of each type. So he's only got a few, but he does have one of each type. So if you go to like a yoga studio and take a hatha yoga class, you're going to find, oh, okay, well, there's a balance posture here. And then there's a posture that like does this with your hips. There's a posture that does this other thing. And you're going to find that all that stuff is that there are a lot more postures than what Crowley has. But Crowley does have one representative of each of the types. Should also point out, Crowley stuff is completely different from like Ashtanga or like exercise yoga. Because exercise yoga didn't exist during Crowley's lifetime. And a lot of people don't know that.
I did not know that.
So what that is what like Iyengar and Ashtanga and systems like that are around today. What that is it's a combination of yoga postures and European calisthenic exercises that went over into India during the British colonial period. And so it's this combination of these postures and exercise. And that was not done at all, when Crowley was learning this stuff in the early 1900s. What they were doing for yoga sitting is you would just, sit in your asana for a while, then you would do another asana and sit for a while. Some yoga studios have class like a gentle hatha yoga classes where it's just you make the postures and hold the postures instead of doing all the exercise stuff. That is closer to the kind of thing that Crowley learned when he studied yoga. And when he talks about yoga, that's the kind of thing he's talking about.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of an interesting aside, but yeah.
Yeah, and like another aside off of that, incantation, I've heard, I forget the name, but that's a yoga in itself. Like there's the physical yoga, and then go ahead.
So the system of yoga, so yoga just means union. Okay. And so if you look at Crowley is like the 8 lectures on yoga and some of this other stuff. I mean, yeah. So there's so hatha yoga, that's like asanas and postures. Like I think it's Raja yoga, that's like control of thought. And there are several different kinds of yoga that really are not really related to like, going to the gym kind of thing. It is different. And so the idea of having control of thought, that's the idea of being able to cultivate single-pointed consciousness, or what we call will in Thelema. Thelema is Greek for will. And that single-pointed consciousness is pretty much like one of the key things to making magic work. I mean, you could do magic without a spell, without anything, if you get good at this, you're driving down the road and you're late for something, okay? And if you hold the thought that you're going to be able to drive to where you're going. Hold it for about 25 seconds without deviating from it. And it helps to make it some kind of a hand motion. Don't know why, but it does. And if you do that right, you won't be late. Or you'll be way less late than you otherwise be. Like you'll get more green lights and stuff like that. That's a simple, like real world, instant kind of magical thing. And what it is so magic at its base is consciousness acting on the universe. Okay, that's really what it is. And I think that if we get to a point where we have a good scientific model of what consciousness is, we're going to be able to understand how that works. And there are people working on it, but it's a difficult problem. It's literally called the hard problem of consciousness. How do we go from our conscious experience to, we can measure the brain doing all kinds of stuff, but how does that turn into this? And there are various ideas, various models. People have different ideas. I think in the consciousness model sphere, I think probably Penrose Hameroff is the closest to what I go with. You can look that up. It's basically the idea that consciousness in some way exploits certain kinds of quantum effects. And so that's what makes it difficult to model successfully in classical space. And that's what makes it so it's really not computable on a machine the same way that another algorithm is. So, I mean, the idea would be, the implication is that you could not build a conscious AI unless you're using a quantum computer. So it depends to some extent on the kind of hardware you're using. And the brain has certain protein structures that are small enough that they interact with particles at the quantum level.
Yeah.
So,
no, have you seen Westworld by chance?
yeah, I have.
Yeah, it reminds me, what you're talking about reminds me a lot of that, trying to recreate consciousness and the difficulties they have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I actually think it's a hardware thing. You know, there was this thing about this Google engineer saying that, oh, this AI has become
Yeah.
conscious. Did you see that?
I heard about
Okay,
that.
well,
Yeah.
the AI is a chat bot. It's a super simple algorithm. I don't even think it's a page long. And what it's doing is it's just parsing through a gigantic database of text. Okay, so how that could possibly be conscious makes no real sense to me. But people have been fooled by that before a lot. People were fooled by ELIZA, you know, back in the 70s. I mean, I'm an IT consultant, so I may do like software development. So that ELIZA was this important thing in the history of computer science, because, well, technically, you could argue, hey, it passed the Turing test. It fooled some people. But the people it fooled didn't really understand what was going on.
Yeah.
And then it's like they got used to it and kind of realized, oh, this is what it's doing. And then it doesn't fool them anymore. So the whole idea of the Turing test winds up being kind of fuzzy.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and I did read the transcripts of that, and very much of it reads like it's stuff that seems like it's coming off of essays from the internet or things that it's either consumed or is referencing. And furthermore, I happen to know this from my own personal experience. I don't think in words. So consciousness is not linguistic. If consciousness were linguistic, I wouldn't be conscious because I don't think in words. And so what that means is that implies that no amount of words you could ever drop into a database could ever make an AI conscious. It should be impossible. So,
yeah, and you wonder, because I wonder if I think in words. I think I do, but and so maybe it's a bit more varied than we think. Like consciousness works differently from person to person, perhaps.
Some people do and some people don't. But the quality of consciousness described by people is really not that different, whether you think in words or not. You maybe have an internal monologue, you maybe don't. I don't naturally have one, but I write books, and I learned to turn it on like when I'm composing a scene for dialogue and stuff, because I need to kind of hear it in my mind. Otherwise, I turn it off and it doesn't run. And I didn't do it naturally. I had to specifically train myself to do it. But it doesn't really change the quality of my consciousness. It's like, oh, well, it's like now there's this other thing that I'm kind of listening to because I'm trying to write a scene for this character. And okay, now I'm not writing anymore, so it turns off again. That's how it is with me.
Yeah. And so you'd said holding a thought for, say, a certain amount of time.
About 25 seconds.
Yeah. Like being present kind of makes things go your way.
Well, so you have to have a vector, okay? And here's what I mean by that. You have to, the thought you're holding has to be directed in a certain way. It has to be the thought that you want. Just being present doesn't necessarily change things. Although, you know, there's really nothing wrong with being present in your life. I mean, certainly much spiritual, you know, development, meditation training, stuff like that is about getting you to be mindful and present in your life. That's not a bad thing. But in terms of making this work, it has to be this kind of vector. Okay. So in other words, I have to hold the thought that I am going to get where I'm going quickly if I want to get where I'm going quickly. I can't just hold the thought I am present in the moment. So does that make sense? See the difference there? So it's kind of like the idea behind this law of attraction thing. The problem with the law of attraction, though, is that new thought, which is where it comes from, that's the spirit, the school that it comes from, has a terrible problem. And the terrible problem that it has is it says that your thoughts deterministically control your experience. And that's the way it is because the universe is actually made of thought. It's not made of matter. Okay? That is wrong. By thinking certain ways, you can influence the world around you, but you don't control it. And everybody else can influence it too. So, you know, yes, focusing, okay, I make a vision board of like all the stuff that I want that, you know, that to make me rich or something like that. I want a nice car, boat, you know, stuff like that. And then you focus on that vision board. Okay, the vision board does kind of supply a vector. So it's kind of like what I'm talking about. You focus your thought on that and you concentrate on it and try to really, just embody that thought. Okay, that probably is going to work in the sense of it's going to shift some probabilities your way, but it might not get you the boat in the picture. In fact, it probably won't. And you might actually do better, in fact, by putting something really extravagant on the board so that, the probability shift goes as far as it can and you get as much as you can within the limits of what you can do with your consciousness. And the main problem with New Thought is they insist that there are no limits. And it's all about, oh, your thoughts just aren't pure enough. And that's just another kind of dumb thing. It's like I got mugged walking down the street. I was thinking thoughts of this person will mug me while I'm walking down the street. It's completely my fault. The other person has no agency whatsoever. It's just my thoughts and my experience. And it's like, oh, come on. That's just ridiculous. And I mean, you can't build a spiritual system like that. It's just fundamentally unrealistic and implausible.
Gotcha. And so we talk about you have what is that called? Just being present. That's
well,
was there some term for that?
There are a lot of terms for it. I mean, so mindfulness, that's kind of the psychological term. They teach mindfulness meditation. Being present in the moment. Some meditators talk about it as like Zen mind or something like that. You could talk about it as a four above, though not necessarily as high a level as samadhi, which is absorption in something. I mean, samadhi has different levels, so it's not like, ecstatic samadhi when I'm like focusing on a traffic light, kind of thing. That's reserved for, other sorts of experiences.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, single pointed thought, though, or will, okay? I think will is as good a term as any. Is really about, so your consciousness can't produce a very big probability shift in and of itself. They did research at Princeton, they did research at UNLV that looked at consciousness influencing these things called quantum diodes. They're little random number generators, and they're influenced by, and they're calibrated to return a 1 or a 0, no matter what, at exactly 50%. Based on a piece of radioactive material in there, and we know all the equations for that. So the idea that researchers had, originally this was Dean Radin, who is with the Noetic Sciences group now, and at UNLV, he did this research and found that subjects could shift the diode a little bit, but it's really small. Regular people could only do it about 0.01%. So that's like, one pick in 1,000 they could influence. They over the years, researchers have found a few people who could do a little bit better. So when Richard Jan did the same research at Princeton, he found that most people, could hit about that 0.01. The average came out to about 0.02. And he found one person who could reliably hit a 0.05, which I'm guessing is somebody with more natural psychic ability than everybody else. And so that's 5 hits out of 1,000 versus 1 hit out of 1,000. But that's very small, right? You're trying to, I'm trying to cast a spell to get a job. Okay. And that's all the shift I could do. Well, there's stuff you could do about that. So part of the trick with magic is leveraging that into situations that work well. One of the reasons that the diode experiments are probably not as good as they would otherwise be is there's no direct link between the diode and the subject. So two kinds of links in magic: similarity link and contagion links. Okay, contagion link is two things that touch each other have a contagion link. That's pretty easy to explain. If you look at like the mechanism of quantum entanglement, it's similar to what they're doing with quantum teleportation and trying to build a quantum internet today. That's a technology that's pretty well understood. Similarity link, well, I have a picture of you and I can influence you. How does that work? Well, the guy who's doing research in that is Rupert Sheldrake, who's doing research on what he calls morphic resonance. And the morphic resonance hypothesis explains that, so like you put two metronomes on a table and you start them at different rates, they'll just kind of synchronize, because what they're happening is they're producing vibrations at a certain rate and it's syncing up. Well, in Sheldrake's model, morphic resonance is kind of like that. So I have a picture of you, it looks like you, and so it resonates with you. So I could do something probabilistically to this picture, and it resonates on the other side and has an effect. Obviously, you have the best link if you can combine both. You know, that's where the whole like the voodoo doll thing comes from, right? You get a doll that looks like a person, they put their photo on the face, you know, dress them the same way. And if you can, get like some hair, fingernail clippings, put that into the doll. So there's your contagion link, and then the way the doll looks, that's your similarity link. And so now you have a link that you could use to influence somebody magically. Now, what's not true is, oh, well, then I just stick a pin in it and it does something. Well, maybe. You got to be pretty psychic to make that work, or you've got to use a formal magical procedure. Yeah. I mean, formal magical procedures are kind of like katas in karate. I don't know if you ever studied karate. It's like a set of moves. It's a certain series of moves that you use to be particularly effective. Right. Yeah. And so ritual forms are like that. They are different movements, combinations of names, vibrations, actions, and so on that magicians have worked out over time that are particularly effective for harnessing and focusing that psychic ability. And so since it's small, we've really got to focus it well to get big changes. But one thing that does work in our favor is chaos theory, which is that everything in nature is filled with all of these critical points. And so you do a small push at the right point, it can cascade into something a lot bigger. And so that's how you can get big magical effects, even though the probability shift is small.
Gotcha. And so we have like the will, we have a vector, right? And that influences the world we live in, right? And how does gnosis fit into that? That's you can achieve gnosis by doing that?
All right. So so to some degree, although I mean it also does require some mystical practice. You go around just doing like practical stuff all the time. That's simple like that, probably, you know, your psychic senses will get a little bit better. I mean, you may have an experience. It varies a lot by person. You're much more likely to have that experience, though. I mean, if you meditate regularly, and meditating regularly makes the instant stuff work better too. You know, meditation is really important. There are some different mystical rituals that you can do and mystical practices that really work to expand your consciousness. So the big trick of what you're trying to do with magic is, well, what I call transpersonal realization. Not everybody calls it that, but the idea is that, so in magic, so in Thelemic magic, we use a version of the Kabbalistic tree of life. And if you showed our Kabbalistic tree of life to Jewish friends who know stuff about the Kabbalah, which is originally where it came from 500 years ago, they'd be like, what the heck are you doing with that? Because our system is nothing like Jewish Kabbalah at this point. We have this tree of life diagram, and even that comes from a guy, Athanasius Kircher, who is a Christian who is working on that. And then Kircher goes back to like Pico della Mirandola. Pico della Mirandola was like late 1400s. You have all this development through the 1500s, and Kircher is in the 1600s, kind of putting together a tree of life like the one we use, but it really split off from the Jewish version in the late 1400s, so quite a while ago. And so what you have is, so you have kind of the personal level of reality, and that's below this barrier that's called the veil of Paracath on the tree of life. And so what you have is, so the center of the Sephiroth, which are like vessels. Some people call them spheres. Sephira does not mean sphere, though. It's a different word. It means vessel. And so you have like the moon is the center here, and the sun is the center up here. So it's like this transition from lunar consciousness, which is like, you know, running in what psychologists call passive frame. Okay, you're just kind of running on your conditioning. You're just kind of doing stuff automatically. Okay, you're not using will when you do that. Transitioning to solar consciousness, which is active frame cognition, where you're acting from will. And the other realization that goes with that, transpersonal realization, is that your consciousness doesn't end at the boundaries of your skin, and it really doesn't. Okay, so I'm looking at you on the screen. I mean, I'm really experiencing an image of you inside my brain, but it also resonates with the image of you over there. Okay, and so I can sit here and I can say, all right, well, I'm looking at an image of you. I can project my consciousness at you because I know my consciousness doesn't end at the boundaries of my skin. And that is what is sometimes talked about as adept realization. There's other stuff like the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel that goes with it and some other things. But that transpersonal piece is really central to doing practical magic. You need to be able to extend your consciousness further out into the world than just like, what your aura would be or whatnot. And once you get that flip and you stabilize that level of cognition and your mind is working that way, then, the subtle energies that you can work with at that point can do some effective stuff. If that made sense, hopefully not too complicated.
Well, I'm not too familiar with the Tree of Life, and I mean, that makes sense, like the moon versus the sun, passive versus active, right?
Well, think about it as going from conditioned to willed, and think about it as going from me as this isolated individual here to me at one with everything I perceive by whatever means. Stabilize your consciousness in that. That's part of getting good at magic.
Yeah, interesting. Now I've heard, I know, I think you have to go in a little bit. So, but does the symbol of the cross, is that important? That I've heard that it's like a symbol of being present, like a point of will.
In our system, it represents the 4 elements. So air, earth, fire, water. And then the center of the cross is the balance point where the elements surround you in a balanced configuration. So the idea behind that is that if you have the elements in balance, and the elements correspond to qualities of personality, they correspond to like types of activity, types of thoughts. I mean, you have this whole long list of correspondences there, but the idea is you put, 2 opposing elements here, 2 opposing elements here. It's like it creates a sort of a field that is powered in a sense by the dynamic balance between those elements. And then at the center point, you could stand, and that gives you a firm foundation to direct the forces of the elements, which resonate with the forces of nature. So that's kind of the lore surrounding it.
Gotcha. So it's not, I guess, directly relevant to, what do we want to say, to will, right?
Well, it is and it isn't. Okay, so like in the Gnostic Mass, I mean, the cross is also used representing the 4 elements. The cross is also used as the sign of light. So light represents manifestation. So manifestation arises from the 4 elements. Okay, so you're gonna do your best at jumping from personal to transpersonal realization if you've got all those elements stabilized, because you're expanding your consciousness to something that's bigger than what it used to be. And just because it's bigger than what it used to be, it includes more stuff. Yeah. And so if you can, and it's going to be more balanced because it's bigger, your individual idiosyncrasies are reduced to a degree when you are connecting with that kind of, with that level of consciousness. I actually don't like to talk about higher and lower spiritual, because I actually think that's wrong. I don't think spirit is any better than matter. I think spirit and matter are qualities of the same thing. So all the stuff in the universe has, that's made of matter, has quantum information, and then consciousness is a property of quantum information. And basically consciousness is what we call spirit. It's consciousness stuff. So everything in the universe really can be looked at in a spiritual way or a material way. So, but anyway, the point is that what you're doing is you're expanding it outward, though, to include more. So you're not getting rid of you, who was here before. You're just enriching yourself with more and more things. Yeah. And so in the Thelemic system, the idea is that, Thelema talks about this idea of expanding yourself by uniting ecstatically with other manifestations of consciousness. That can be a spirit, that can be a deity, that can be another person, that can be whatever you want it to be. And especially if the universe is infused with consciousness, it could be practically anything.
Yeah. And that reminds me of, there's the part in the Gnostic Mass where they say, I'm just a man among men, right? Mm-hmm. How can I be the priest? And then the answer is, be the priest, right? So it's will, right? Just will it,
Mhm.
right?
Well,
And
okay, that's one interpretation, yes.
yeah, well, I mean,
Um,
yeah,
in
with
this, so what, so
yeah,
what, so what the line is, so the priest emerges from the tomb and says, "I am a man among men. How shall I be worthy to administer the virtues to the brethren?" And then the priestess takes water and purifies the priest with water and says, "Be the priest pure of body and soul." Okay. Then the water goes back. Then the priestess takes the incense and consecrates the priest with the incense. And the line for that is, be the priest fervent of body and soul. Then the rest of it is the priestess puts on the robe, be the flame of the sunlight ambient, so the priest of the sun puts on the crown, and be the serpent thy crown, O thou priest of the Lord. So the priest is a man among men when he emerges from the tomb, but the be the priest is actually like not where it stops. That's the first part of the sentence.
mm-hmm.
Now, I do think that some of the symbolism there is about um, the priest willing it to be, or perhaps the priestess willing the priest to be the priest, because there's a balance between the two there. And Thelema explicitly rejects dogma. So that's the thing. You read that comment in the back of the book of laws, wise to burn it after the first reading and stuff like that. And you're not supposed to discuss it because that's being a center of pestilence. Well, the point of it is that the idea is we try to not have too much dogma creep in terms of people advancing their personal opinions and interpretations of various things, because we're a Gnostic system. We try to leave that up to the individual. I mean, within some reasonable parameters. I mean, sometimes somebody will come to the interpretation of the book of the law, and I'm like, that's completely nuts. I mean, it's happening. I mean, there's people who talk about Space Brothers, or some people talk about reptilians. Some people talk about whatever conspiracy nonsense, and I'm just like, none of that is real. It's silly. But so within reasonable parameters, so we try to leave it up to the individual to define, what the meaning of those things are for themselves.
Yeah. Which kind of keeps it in mind with show, don't tell, right?
Yeah. Come to a bunch of masses and then see what you think about it, instead of, see one mass. Okay, now or read it online. Oh, I read it. Now I know what it means. We've had those people have come around, and they didn't have a very good time. I'll say that. I mean, not that we did anything to them, but it's just like, okay, so you're telling us you completely understand this, and when we say, well, what about this? Like, oh, you don't understand it. It's like you don't have a good time in a social group doing that. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, definitely. So I know you have to get going. You have other engagements. Do you want to drop off, or
I probably should. And
okay.
Title-wise, maybe you could probably call this Thelemic magic if you wanted to, rather than OTO magic, because Thelema isn't specific to OTO. OTO is one Thelemic organization, but the principles of Thelemic magic, would apply to somebody who was, in, Crowley's AA, or somebody even was a solitary practitioner, learning about it by reading. I mean, all this stuff is stuff that you can do without being part of an organization. Being an organization does not make you a Thelemite.
Yeah,
and there are a lot of Thelemites. Yep.
That sounds like a very Thelemic thing to say, right?
And there are a lot of Thelemites who are not in any Thelemic organizations.
Yeah, very good. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming. I really do appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Very enlightening. I don't want to, because I don't want to say interesting
you.
and be mundane like that.
Yeah.
All right.
Now, if you wanted to do another one and talk specifically about Enochian, we could do that, because we didn't touch on that at all, and I published books on it. But
no, absolutely, I'd love to do more interviews. This was probably the most compact information, rich interview I've done. So I really enjoyed it, and I would love to.
Okay, well, I'd be down for it. I mean, let me know. I mean, if you do make a time, please stick to it. Because I have so much going on. I'm the master of the local OTO lodge. I'm an IT consultant. I'm a writer. I have so much stuff going on that I have to, unfortunately, stick to kind of a tight schedule.
No, yeah, certainly. Yep. All right. Well, thanks so much. Here, we'll end the broadcast here. And thanks so much. Well, thanks everybody for watching.